Democracy That Delivers is brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. Now, to your host.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's podcast. My name is Kathy Tai. I am Deputy Regional Director for Asia at CIPE. And today, my co-host is Kendra Barak.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kendra. I'm an Associate Program Officer here at CIPE working on Southeast Asia regional projects.
And today, it's our pleasure to welcome two of our beloved partners, Tricia Yeo, who is CEO of Ideas, a prominent think tank based in Malaysia, and Barak O, founder of Future Forum, another independent think tank, also is doing fantastic work in Cambodia. Hello, Tricia and Barak.
Hi, Kathy. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Kathy and Kendra, and hi, Trisha. It's good to be connected here.
Hello.
Hello. So, Tricia, if I may ask you to start, maybe just tell us a little bit about yourself and Ideas as an organization.
Sure. Again, thanks, Site, for having us over. My name is Tricia Yeo. I'm the CEO of Ideas, Institute for Democracy and Economic Affairs, based in Malaysia. We are an independent think tank that works on policy research and advocacy on a whole range of fronts. We look at economic and social issues. We look at institutional independence and strengthening, and of course, in upholding democracy and governance in Malaysia, as well as in the region.
That sounds fantastic. Barak, can you also say a few words about yourself and Future Forum?
Yeah, hi again. My name is Virak U. Future Forum was founded about 5-6 years ago. The core component of our work is to support young policy thinkers, critical thinkers, creative thinkers in their understanding, in their leadings in terms of actually proposing policy solutions to the future of Cambodia. And one of the other main part of what we are doing is also through working with young people, we also do policy work in relations to many topics, including investments and human rights, among other issues. But we're always looking at solution oriented. We're always looking at futures oriented, and we used foresight as a an underlying methodology and approach in our discussions and publications of our policy research.
That's a very comprehensive description of Future Forum's work. So maybe move back to Tricia a little bit. So Tricia, your organization has been critical and central to a project, a regional initiative called Belt and Road Initiative Monitor, BRI Monitor. So can you tell us a little bit about this project and then how it was started and kind of Ideas, role in it, and some of the major findings that you found interesting?
Sure. So yes, basically this is part of like our larger work in looking at transparency and procurement. So Ideas has been looking at the transparency within public procurement in Malaysia for many, many years. We started out in 2012 and we realized just how much potential lack of governance, for the lack of saying corruption, can exist when large infrastructure projects are not done in a proper manner, where the procedures are not adhered to, and so on. And so when we had the opportunity to embark on this larger ambitious project to actually look at transparency and accountability in the infrastructure deals funded through the Belt and Road Initiative, we basically jumped at the opportunity to do so. And so this started in 2020. Ideas was essentially the secretariat for a big regional project, which eventually came to be known as the BRI Monitor. So very simple, monitoring the Belt and Road Initiative across the region. So this was and still is still ongoing, an effort with 4 other civil society organizations across Southeast Asia and the Pacific. So we brought together think tanks in Cambodia, which Future Forum here is representing, Papua New Guinea, Myanmar, the Philippines, and of course in Malaysia. So 5 groups all together put our heads together, looking at major case studies within our countries and looking at really deep dive qualitative research in the projects, as well as it ranged not just large scale infrastructure projects, but we also, some of the case studies were also related to telco, but essentially any of the projects that received Chinese backing or funding. We looked into the governance gaps of these projects with the hopes of informing policy advocacy eventually. We have a lot of interesting findings. We did a big transparency assessment tool, which is in accordance with the infrastructure data standards, and we assessed the project's regulatory framework as well. And each of the partner countries also had like a summarized country report that condensed the findings from all the case studies. And it's all summarized really nicely in our website. So you can just go to brimonitor.org, and it's got the assessment tool, it's got a deep dive case study. So the real objective was that there's a lot of interest in the BRI around the world, and of course, not excluding Southeast Asia. And this was an opportunity to really be able to get local data into it. So it's not just on a eagle eye view, but being able to analyze the more qualitative aspects of each of the projects. And there are many aspects of this, and we hope that both a deep dive national study as well as large comparative studies from across 5 countries was able to allow us to see trends and hopefully make this useful for even other countries around the world. Because as we know, the BRI doesn't just operate in Southeast Asia, but also something that can be comparatively assessed across different regions.
Thanks so much, Trisha. Yeah, and I know that we've heard from partners in other regions who have been really impressed by your work, and I think it's a really great tool. Virak, wanted to turn a bit to you. I know Future Forum also participated in this initiative to monitor BRI investments, but also is kind of taking the first step to go beyond that and look at investments from other funders as well. So I'd be interested to hear kind of what were the findings that Future Forum had that you found interesting.
Well, we were asked about the project in terms of actually BRI and BRI is a new quite popular term that came about after a certain narrative is being was being forged that was happening 6-7 years ago. But even before then there was a lot of investment projects in infrastructures. And these infrastructure projects are various, including from dams to roads to bridges to coal power plants. And so when we were asked to look at it, one of the things we challenge our young researchers to do is to ensure that we are going about doing this without any conclusion. So when we were asked to participate in this interesting project, we know there's a lot of strong opinions around the BI investment or the BI initiative itself, and of course I think any mentions of China were bound to be getting divided opinions, and these opinions are fully energetically charged, and often these could be very sensitive as well. So when Future Forum was asked, and we discussed this, of course we challenge our young researchers to basically to look at the BRI projects, come out with sound methodology. We're looking at ways to assess in a way that actually, again, without drawing any conclusions, without any trying to be as unbiased as possible. And we will then use the different assessment methodologies to ensure that we are giving it a fair chance, a fair shot to actually assess it properly. And we knew it would be difficult, and so the idea is actually to try to assess it and try to be as impartial as possible. Also, given the sensitivity of the issues and these case studies potentially raised, we want to be accurate, and we spend a lot of efforts on the methods and discussing that as well. But overall, I think when we undertook the case studies, initially we look at the BI projects or any projects that would be considered to be part of the BRI, and then we look at potential speeches, or we look at speeches by either the Cambodian government or the Chinese government when they can indicate publicly that a certain infrastructure project would be according to themselves, would be considered to be a part of the BRI, because again, there's no clear linkages to what constitute the BRI and what's not. And I think for us, what constitutes the BRI is when the Chinese official, for example, in inauguration or some groundbreaking events, for example, make such statement that it is a BRI, then we would accept it as it is, as such. So when we undertook these case studies, of course, I think it was not completely, I wouldn't say surprising, the fact that we could not get relevant documents and informations on these projects. Most of these things are not made available online. Definitely never easy to access for the public, neither by our young researchers either. And so it was not completely surprising, but we thought if these four BI projects, and these are big investments, these are big projects, in up to hundreds of millions of dollars combined. And so when we look at it and say, okay, if these are not surprising and there's lack of transparency, lack of bidding process, for example, that's completely transparent. We don't know how tenders and biddings and procurements are being done, whether and what kind of decision process put in place to guarantee efficiencies and effectiveness, but also to guarantee, for example, that make sure the Cambodia side will get their money's worth. And so we were looking at all of these indicators and different assessments criterias, and of course we found that these four projects that we conduct case studies on lack transparency. Very difficult to assess whether there's therefore accountability, whether the bidding process actually going to the best bidders, for example, we is very difficult to assess. And so the fact that it was not surprising, because that's a common practice in Cambodia. There's a tendency to have lack of transparency. So we said it's very difficult to conclude that this is specifically a BRI issue. And because of that, we proposed with our partners, including Tricia and IDEA, to do another case study, and that is on a JICA back of infrastructure project, Japan funded the infrastructure project, and so we go about doing that. So when we select a generic JICA project to assess, and we found that, of course, there's not all information is readily available online, but we found it to be the information that is available online are much more significant. We can also ask the officials for documents, for more documents, and so that was what we were trying to do. It's just basically to ensure that we can then compare various infrastructure projects. But I think the data and the case studies should speak for itself, and therefore I think I encourage the listeners to go to our website and the BRI Monitor website and have a look.
Yes, definitely. The website is www.brimonitor.org. As Varak suggested, welcome the listener to go to check out the case studies. They really are very comprehensive and a very in-depth analysis about the project stakeholders and major findings, major governance gaps, and then also have corresponding recommendations. Varak, I do have a follow-up question, because I know in the process of implementing the BRI Monitor project, younger researchers in Future Forum played a pretty big role in assisting the research and then the analysis and data gathering and information analysis. So I'm wondering if you can just walk us through a little bit on kind of the thought process, like why working and nurturing the younger generation of researchers is so important for think tanks like Future Forum.
Well, number one for sure is that anything that they learn, they have their energy life, the work life is far as a lot longer than us. So I think it's a good investment in knowing that they will use their knowledge and understanding. So I think naturally, I think we acknowledge the younger researchers do have a longer lifespan. Therefore, they can work longer and much longer in the future, and hopefully have a bigger impact. But also, I think to be honest, also I think these issues with BRI, for example, is an infrastructure project. we're looking at not the cost and benefit of such project to be 30, 40, up to 50, 60 years ahead of us. And I think the younger people will be the ones that either bear the responsibility, reap the benefit of these kind of projects. And I think it's only fair to them to also engage them in the assessment of these projects, so they have a better say and what we're getting ourselves into, and we're actually what we are getting them, the young people, into, and we're holding them to, we're holding their fates to decisions made by earlier generations. And I think it's always fair to try to get them on board. But I think these young people are very passionate and they work hard, and they are much more willing to learn and to do the right thing. And so I think they're much more passionate. They're eager to learn. They're eager to do the right thing. And I think for us, it's an easy decision to always trying to get them on board, and to not just getting them on board to follow us, but I think to lead in this, the advocacy and understanding, and hopefully join in making decisions for their futures as well.
Thanks so much, Farouk. Totally agree how important it is to involve the younger generation. And I always really enjoy reading the work that your young researchers produce, really insightful and also really hopeful and well-rounded visions for like a more inclusive future. It's really inspiring to read. Trisha, I know that your ideas also works with young researchers, so be curious to see kind of how do you see it as important, and kind of what insights have you gained from working with the young researchers?
Yeah, thanks, Kendra. So one interesting thing that we've actually been able to do more recently is adopt the methodology that we've used for the BRI Monitor, which is essentially looking at these infrastructure projects at the national level, right? So again, the same thing as Future Forum and the other think tanks, we looked at 4 major case studies that represented BRI projects in Malaysia. But we adopted that methodology and we adapted it for young researchers who are interested in monitoring these infrastructure projects at their own state levels. So it's been really an interesting journey for us as well, because one of the trends in Malaysia is that a lot of the activism or the research or the policy advocacy is highly centralized in Kuala Lumpur, in the capital of Malaysia. That's where Ideas is based. That's where most of the activists are based. But what we tried to do is to bring it one step lower, so at the subnational level. And actually, this is where many projects are actually based themselves, right? Like the 4 projects that we chose, none of them are situated in the Klang Valley, what we call in the capital. And they're all situated like in the different states, like in Johor, in Sabah, in different parts of Malaysia. So we've been training young activists to be able to understand what are the requirements of a good project. And so, the different stages. So the BRI Monitor has 5 stages. And so we asked the researchers to do the same thing, right? To look at their own projects that are of their choice, and then keep their state governments accountable as well. And so, yeah, I mean, the workshop that we just had, like just 2 weeks ago, it was a physical workshop. It was so energetic, and there was just so much interest in the room in learning more. And of course, exactly as what Virat says as well, I mean, one of the main things is to talk about the financial implications of these contracts that are being signed. So in the case of BRI, of course, it will be the case of high interest and debt-related concerns with Chinese loans. Of course, again, the same theme of lack of transparency in the procurement process. So these themes allow them to see that if the government of Malaysia, as well as their state governments, because many times these contracts are actually signed by multiple parties, which involve the state government as well as the federal government, the central government. And so if these governments are actually signing contracts and agreements that are, number one, not even economically feasible in the first place. Number 2, also have environmental and social impacts, which, climate change and ESG, like all of that is such a big topic of the day, climate crisis. So if these have environmental impacts in the long run, and finally, as Virat says, like financial implications in the long run as well, what's the damage that these projects are going to have on the long-term finances of the country. And I think the young people are starting to realize that it is really important for them to monitor these things, because it also has a direct impact on their livelihoods and the livelihoods of the future generations as well. And I think all of this is happening at a time when there's a lot of change happening in Malaysia. So politically, it's uncertain as to, which parties are going to take the lead. There's an election coming up. So it really is the right time and the right time as well for young policy researchers to be able to demand for more information. So demanding accountability from the bottom is really what we're trying to get at. And now you suddenly have a more responsive government, both at the state and federal levels. And I think it really is the best time to train young people and to get them to ask questions, because other times perhaps there would not be a government that listens. But now, especially if we are being able to translate the highly technical research into language that young people can understand, can appreciate, we have been seeing really nice responses, and we hope to do more in the coming year.
That's a very hopeful note. And then also I like what you describe is like a really energetic vibe from the younger generation. And, it just makes you feel very optimistic about the future. And I guess that's the reason why we all want to work with the youth. So, Trisha, I have a follow-up question for you. So you've been working with the younger generation through this new project that you have, and you have been engaging with the BRI model for the past 2 years. What are kind of the major lessons learned or like interesting findings that was not expected? If you can just share a little bit on this, that would be interesting.
Yeah, so I think, when we started the project, we had great ambitions, right? To, like I said at the start, do this sort of deep dive analysis. And we thought that, okay, things were like the facts were there. All we needed to do was just, like dig them up or like email and ask questions to the right people. But I think the same challenges that we faced, which is probably what the other partners faced as well, was of course a lack of information. And sometimes just trying to do immediate searches would not actually result in anything that came out of it. The second thing was that because this project spanned a 2-year period, I mean, there were pluses and minuses with the fact that it was a long-term project. On the good side, it allowed there to be some time, right, for the research team itself to understand a very complex subject and be able to get really into it, speak to the necessary experts as well, with the partners around. But I think one of the negatives or things that we did not foresee was how the project actually, all these projects that we selected, the BRI projects, they actually changed in nature over time. So the financing mechanisms, the partners themselves, I mean, one of the projects that we actually looked at, which is called the Malacca Gateway, it actually was dropped, shelved, and then it actually was reinvigorated, right, in March of this year, after having been returned to the private developer by the state government as a so-called amicable solution. So it, I think, was tricky to be able to come to a conclusion and just to make a final note and say, okay, look, we're just stopping this at this point because these project landscapes were constantly shifting. And also, by the way, they also shifted based on what was happening in the political equation of the day. So in Malaysia, we had a particularly turbulent time where we had 2-3 different government changes in a very short period of time, over 2-3 years, in as many years. And so each time when there was a government change, these large infrastructure projects, the arrangements, the financial agreements, the loans, the final amount, like what it was actually the project amounted to, all of these things had changed as well. So I think it does tell you something, although it was a frustrating thing for our research team, I think it does tell you something about the instability of government to government arrangements and government to government infrastructure projects. We talk about in legal terms, for example, the concept of legal sanctity or contract sanctity. But why is it that when governments change, and we know that in Southeast Asia, we are actually living in a time where there is quite a politically volatile scenario in some of our Southeast Asian countries, right? And so whether or not the political volatility actually impacts upon these major public infrastructure projects, which also has a knock-on effect on ultimately the livelihood of the people. Because if we're saying that these large infrastructure projects actually are going to be able to bring upon the economic and social value for future generations, if especially when it's got to do with like ports or telecommunication or public infrastructure, right? So public services, how will these negatively impact upon society if all of those various implications are actually changed about? Are the governments actually studying the implications of these changes? And are they detrimental? And so on and so forth. So I think the fluctuations, that itself was unexpected. And I think that itself is a very important research finding for all countries around the world that are signing up for G2G government loans.
Thanks so much, Trisha, and completely agree. I think your case studies did a really excellent job in capturing those fluctuations and also kind of preserving a snapshot of transparency at a certain moment in time and kind of documentation that would have otherwise been lost, and kind of allows advocates and others to really kind of evaluate the history of transparency in a project. Varrock, I would be curious, kind of any final interesting findings from your case studies or kind of the process of research that you'd like to leave the listeners with?
Well, if you look at the a lot of these a lot of these projects, whether it's in Laos, in Cambodia, in Malaysia, but also in countries like Sri Lanka, for example, we have seen backlashes. We have seen the people themselves starting to feel frustrated, at the very least felt left out. And you see some of these deals, for example, where the people and especially the young people who felt obligated to be the one who going to continue paying the longest, paying the price the longest, they will question the government to government agreements. And certainly, I think one of the lessons I hope governments will learn is that eventually they have to bring the young people along in any of these deals. They have to incorporate decisions and the views of young people also.
Trisha, so before we end today's episode, do you have any final words you would like to share with our listeners?
Yes. So I think that it's been a really interesting journey for us because it's not just taught us about the governance gaps that exist between country and country when these large arrangements are made, largely shrouded in secrecy, right? So we know that already. I mean, transparency was always the thing that we wanted to center our research on the project on. But I think it's also taught us about the importance of the host countries to be able to emerge with their own sets of rules and laws, procedures. And this really requires strong and robust institutions within the country itself, because if it means that any other country loan, say coming from country X, is able to take advantage of certain loopholes, like regulatory loopholes, that means that the regulations themselves from the country were not strong enough to begin with, that they could have been taken advantage of. So I think it's a lesson on both sides that we definitely need to be able to strengthen our host, like in my case, Malaysia, the country's institutions and the laws, so that any arrangements that are made, whether it's with China or with any other foreign country loan arrangement deal making is concerned, this would actually be avoided in the future. So it's, again, I suppose, a good, healthy reminder that we need to strengthen our democratic institutions. And I think another reminder is that all of this is not going to happen until and unless there is real demand that comes from the bottom. And if the government of the day sees that there is that demand. So there are a lot of lessons to be learned. And I'm not going to say that we have all the answers and that we've been able to solve all the problems, but I think it's just given us greater insight as to what needs to be done in the future and how to be able to communicate this better so that we can create incentives for the leaders and for the politicians to take that action and to make that change where and when it counts. So yeah, I mean, we look forward to doing more. Indeed, we will be doing more. I think there's also a resurgence actually in interest in China and in the region, especially following what's happening geopolitically around the world. So I think ideas will definitely take advantage of this resurgent interest in the region to be able to talk again about the BRI and any other, follow on from here. We will be looking at taking advantage of our previous research and advocacy and doing more with young people, training people at the subnational level. And we will also be going into the information space. So I think it will be a very interesting journey in the next phase of our research and policy advocacy work.
Thank you, Tricia. Barak, do you have any last word that you would like to share with us?
Yeah, I agree with Trisha, and I think we all understand that any work on infrastructure will have to be a long-term investment, whether on the infrastructure itself, but also investment in accountability system, democratic accountability, but also ensuring that there will be better and more young analysts, policy analysts, project analysts, and people who actually can take part and inform the public of any of these projects. And I think big decisions like that, I think need to involve the public, and I think young researchers and young analysts, young leaders would play a critical role in connecting all of these documents and projects and deals and agreements into information that the public can understand and can appreciate, and also therefore can participate in as well.
With that note, we want to thank all of you for listening and for tuning in today. If you enjoyed this episode and you would like to learn more about the BRI Monitor, please check out the website brimonitor.org and sign up for the newsletter. Feel free to share with others as well. In addition to that, our team, the Asia Pacific team, also has a Twitter account at Asia Cyp Pacific. Thank you all very much for tuning in, and thank you, Kendra, for co-hosting, Tricia and Barak for sharing all the great insights. We will see you next time.
Democracy That Delivers has been brought to you by the Center for International Private Enterprise. For more information, please visit cyp.org.